Across America's forgotten railroads, whispers tell of trains that should no longer run, yet still tear through the night. In North Carolina, a bridge echoes with the screams of passengers lost in a tragic wreck. In Illinois, a silver phantom glides across farmland, gleaming in the moonlight before vanishing into mist. In the wide deserts of Texas, a locomotive roars across the horizon, only to disappear before the eyes of those who dare to watch. And deep in Georgia's countryside, a midnight whistle signals a journey that never ends, carrying pale souls trapped in their final ride. These are not just legends. They are warnings. Once you hear the whistle, it may already be too late. The stone bridge rises from the trees like a forgotten monument, its massive arch cutting against the night sky. The quiet town of Statesville, North Carolina. Everyone knows its name, Bostian Bridge. To outsiders, it's just an old piece of 19th century railroad engineering. But to the locals, it is something else entirely. The stones are soaked in tragedy, and on certain nights, they say the past doesn't stay buried. It screams back to life. It began on a warm August night in 1891. A Richmond and Danville passenger train thundered down the tracks, wheels sparking as they tore against the steel. The locomotive was running late, its engineer determined to make up lost time. The whistle pierced the night like a warning no one could heed. Families inside the cars clutched their belongings as the train raced through the countryside, unaware that fate was waiting on the curve of the Bostian Bridge. The bridge rose 60 feet above the ground, a stone span that seemed invincible. But speed can turn strength into weakness. As the engine hit the curve, the weight shifted, wheels groaned. And with a violent screech, the first car lurched off the tracks. In seconds, the entire train followed, tumbling into the ravine below. Steel twisted like paper wood splintered. Voices of men, women, and children rose into the night, screams echoing long after the car shattered into silence. Dozens died instantly. Survivors stumbled through fire and wreckage, blood mixing with the dark earth. For Statesville, it became the worst rail disaster the state had ever known. But even after the fires went cold and the bodies were laid in the ground, something about that night refused to rest. Not long after, strange whispers began spreading. Farmers walking home at dusk swore they heard the mournful cry of a whistle. When no train was scheduled, hunters reported the rumble of wheels beneath their boots, only to turn and see an empty stretch of track. And then came the visions. People claimed that, under a full moon, they saw the glowing headlight of a phantom locomotive barreling toward the bridge's steel body shimmering like smoke. Witnesses froze as it roared across the span, derailed, and plummeted once again into the darkness below. Then silence. Nothing left but the still night and the sickening memory of what they had just witnessed. The tale grew with each retelling until it became tradition. Families whispered it around campfires, and young thrill-seekers dared one another to stand by the bridge on the anniversary of the crash. Many claimed they heard the groan of steel and the screams of passengers, as if time itself was forced to replay the same nightmare over and over. Some ran home, pale-faced and trembling, unable to explain what they had heard. On the 50th anniversary of the crash in 1941, a crowd gathered at the tracks. They joked nervously, waiting for midnight. Then, from the distance, a headlight appeared blazing, blinding, and bearing down fast. Terrified, the crowd scrambled off the tracks, convinced a real train was about to crush them. But no train ever passed. Instead, what they saw in the flicker of moonlight was a haze of rail cars tumbling into the ravine, screams trailing behind them until the image dissolved into nothingness. The witnesses swore to their graves they had seen the dead relive their last moments. The legend should have ended there, a ghost story frozen in folklore. But the bridge wasn't finished, claiming lives. A group of amateur ghost hunters came to the bridge at night, hoping to catch the phantom train on camera. They were laughing, eager, standing on the tracks when the whistle pierced the air. Except this time, it wasn't a ghost. A real Norfolk Southern freight train thundered toward them, its massive light flooding the bridge. Most managed to scramble out of the way, but one man froze, convinced until the last second that it was the phantom. He didn't make it. His body was found mangled on the tracks, another victim tied to the bridge's cursed history. After that, the whispers in town grew darker. Locals claimed the man wasn't careless. He was lured, drawn in by something he couldn't resist. Something that called to him from the tracks. And if that was true, it meant the ghost train wasn't just a memory of the past. It was hungry, and it wasn't done. The bridge stands quiet by day, just stone and steel fading into the Carolina woods. But at night, when the air hangs heavy and the crickets fall silent, there is a weight to the place. Visitors say you can feel it pressing against your skin, an unseen tension that prickles like static before a storm. No matter how steady your heartbeat, it quickens. When you stand on those tracks, those who linger claim the haunting begins subtly. First a distant vibration beneath the soles of your shoes. Then the faint echo of a whistle, carried on the wind. You tell yourself it's just a passing train, but the sound grows sharper, closer, until the steel rails themselves begin to hum. By then your body knows what your mind refuses to accept. You are no longer alone. Something is coming. Witnesses speak of a blinding headlight splitting the darkness, searing through the trees. The rails glow under its brilliance, and the phantom engine roars toward the bridge with a force that rattles bones. It is massive, furious, unstoppable. Just when you brace for the impact, the train surges past in a rush of heat and steel that isn't there. You hear the shrieks of passengers, their cries stitched with agony and confusion, and then the echo of the crash as the ghost train tumbles again into the abyss below. The silence that follows is worse than the noise because it feels deliberate, like someone or something is still listening. Some believe the souls of the dead are trapped in an endless loop, replaying their tragedy for eternity. Others whisper that the bridge itself has become a prison, its stones cursed to bind the voices of those who perished. But there is another theory, darker than the rest, that the ghost train is not simply repeating history. It is reaching forward, searching for company in its misery. That would explain why the man in 2010 never moved, why he seemed transfixed as if caught in a spell. The dead don't just haunt the bridge, they recruit. Even railroad workers who pass the bridge at night avoid looking directly at it. They say shadows move against the stone when no one is there. That sometimes you hear footsteps pacing the tracks above you, slow and deliberate, as though someone is inspecting the bridge. And when you glance up, a pale figure in a soot-covered coat is standing there, lantern in hand, waving desperately, just like the brakeman who tried in vain to slow the train in 1891. The figure vanishes when approached, but the chill he leaves lingers for hours. There are stories of drivers who, while crossing the nearby roads at night, see a sudden flash of light barreling across the bridge. They hear the thunder of wheels, slam on their brakes in panic, and wait for the impact that never comes. One woman swore she saw passengers staring out from the glowing windows, faces pale, eyes wide, mouths open in screams she could not hear. When the image dissolved, she realized her car engine had stalled, as if something had drained the life from it, never drove that road again. Today, the bridge remains fenced off, a warning to thrill seekers and ghost hunters alike. But every year, people still gather at its edge, on the anniversary of the crash, waiting in silence, listening. Some return home disappointed, muttering that it was just a story. Others return pale, shaken, whispering that they will never speak of what they saw. A few never return at all. If you ever find yourself near Statesville and you feel the pull of the Bostian Bridge, remember this. Not every ghost wants to stay in the past. Some are desperate to drag you into theirs. And on the nights when the whistle cries and the tracks tremble under invisible wheels, the question ISNT whether you LLC the phantom train it. S, whether you LL walk away before it claims you to? The tracks of the Illinois Central once pulsed with life, stretching from the Midwest down into the Deep South, carrying endless freight and passengers across the country. Those who worked its lines said it was like a steel artery of America, never resting, never quiet. But in the spaces between the towns, in the long, empty stretches where fog pooled over the rails, whispers began to take hold. Whispers of something unnatural, something no timetable could explain. They called it the Silver Ghost. The story begins in the early 1900s, near Effingham, Illinois. A passenger train, heavy with families, workers, and travelers, derailed on a curve just outside the town. The wreck was instant and merciless. Cars buckled like tin, screams were swallowed by tearing steel, and fires lit up the night as sparks rained down. Dozens died in moments, their bodies pinned and broken in a grave of twisted wreckage. When morning came, railroad crews cleared the tracks, hauled away the dead, and hammered the line back into working order. But the ground held on to what had happened there, and the stories began soon after. The first to see it were engineers, men hardened by years on the line. They swore a gleaming locomotive came barreling toward them, shining brighter than any real engine, its polished metal reflecting the moonlight. They braced for impact, slamming brakes until sparks flew, only to find the tracks ahead empty. No train, no smoke. Just the echo of something that wasn't there. Night after night, the sightings grew. Workers walking home late whispered of a silver glow sliding silently along the rails. Passengers told of a train running beside theirs, keeping pace in the dark before vanishing into the trees. Some even claimed to see faces in its windows, pale, mournful, pressing against the glass, as if begging to be released. They never spoke, but their eyes followed, hollow and knowing, until the train melted back into the mist. The silver ghost, they said, was most often seen when the world felt stillest nights, when fog coiled across the fields and the only sound was the faint hum of cicadas. It gave no warning whistle, no smoke, just a glow impossible to ignore. Hot. And sometimes, when the air was just right, you could hear something trailing behind its screams, faint and fading, like voices carried from another time. For the men of the Illinois Central, the ghost was not just a curiosity, it was a threat. Conductors told of the apparition materializing directly in front of their locomotives, shimmering silver and solid as iron, only to dissolve at the last moment. More than one engineer claimed to have thrown his brakes so hard that sparks rained like fire, convinced he had nearly collided with something that wasn't there. Even after their hands shook long into the night, knowing they had stared at something they could not explain. Then came the rumors of curses. Farmers swore that after a sighting their livestock dropped dead for no reason. Workers muttered that accidents in the yard always followed the ghost's appearance. And passengers whispered that to glimpse it was to invite tragedy and omen that something was coming for you. The tale that burned itself deepest into memory came from the 1930s, near Carbondale. A group of track workers labored under lantern light, repairing a section of line in the dead of night. The silence was broken by a whistle that cut through the air shrill, mournful and inhuman. They turned, and there it was. A gleaming silver locomotive roaring toward them, brighter than any fire they had ever seen. Men leaped aside, tools clattering, but when the rails should have screamed with its weight, nothing came. The tracks lay empty. Hours later, word spread of a train accident miles away on the same line, with lives lost in the wreckage. The men believed the ghost had not only passed them, but had carried death with it, leaving its mark elsewhere on the rails. The legend of the Silver Ghost grew with every retelling, its presence a shadow over the Illinois Central. Skeptics scoffed, calling it tricks of moonlight on polished tracks or the tired minds of men working endless shifts. But those who had seen it said otherwise. The silver engine was no hallucination. It was a wound, bleeding into the present, carrying the souls of those lost that night near Effingham. And it was still running. By the mid-20th century, the Illinois Central had become more than just a railroad. It was a storybook of fear with the silver ghost etched across every page. Crews whispered about it in hushed tones, their voices carrying the same mix of awe and dread. Because none of them could shake the feeling that the ghost train was alive, that it chose when and where to appear. Reports only grew stranger. Engineers said they sometimes saw its reflection before they saw the train itself. A gleam of liquid silver racing across their windshield, as if the night itself was splitting in two. Others spoke of phantom vibrations under their boots, the steel humming with the weight of something enormous, only for silence to follow. There were passengers, too, ordinary people who swore they saw the silver glow flashing past their window at night, a train with no sound running alongside their own. They watched pale faces staring back at them from the dark, and when they blinked, the vision was gone, but the fear lingered like frost in their bones. The legend deepened with every strange accident tied to the ghost. A brakeman in the 1940s vanished without a trace after claiming he saw the shining locomotive near a siding. In the 1950s, Two conductors on separate runs described the same chilling encounter standing on the rear platform of their train. They watched a glowing engine thunder behind them in the distance, keeping pace, only to vanish when they braced for impact. They never worked the line again. Over time, people stopped asking whether the silver ghost was real. The question shifted into something worse. Why was it still here? Some said it was a memory etched into the earth, forever replaying the moment of disaster. Others whispered darker theories, that the train wasn't repeating history at all, but seeking out the living, trying to drag them into its endless journey. Each sighting wasn't just a haunting, it was a warning. Or maybe an invitation, in abandoned stretches of track where the Illinois Central no longer runs. Some say the ghost still glides through the fog. Locals near Effingham speak of hearing a whistle that freezes the blood, even though no trains run there anymore. Travelers on dark highways claim to glimpse flashes of silver in the fields, racing faster than any real engine. And sometimes, in those lonely moments, they swear they can hear voices calling, layered with panic and sorrow, as if trapped inside steel walls forever in motion. The most unsettling accounts come from those who say the ghost appeared not in front of them, but beside them. Drivers crossing late at night describe the silver train racing parallel to their car, its windows glowing with pale faces pressed against the glass. One woman swore she saw hands slamming against the windows in desperation, and when the train dissolved into mist, her car engine died on the spot, stranding her in the darkness for hours. She never drove that road again. Even today, long after the Illinois Central changed hands and its lines thinned, the silver ghost refuses to fade. Old men still lean close in diners, warning younger travelers to stay off the tracks on foggy nights. Engineers still share stories in quiet, avoiding the subject in daylight, but confessing after dark that the ghost hasn't gone anywhere. And in towns where the rails are rusted and overgrown, people still hear the whistle that shouldn't exist, carried on the wind like a memory that refuses to die. The legend endures because it feeds on fear, on the silence of the night and the memory of lives lost. The silver ghost is more than a story. It is a wound that never closed, a train that never finished its journey. And for those who still dare to walk the old lines, the question is no longer whether they'll see it. It's whether when it comes screaming out of the fog, they all have the strength to look away before it takes them aboard for its endless ride into nowhere. They say Texas nights are wide enough to swallow a man whole. Out there under a sky filled with stars, too bright to feel safe? The land stretches endlessly, and the silence is broken only by the distant hum of insects or the whisper of wind brushing over dry plains. But sometimes that silence is shattered by something unnatural, a sound that doesn't belong. A sound that sends shivers crawling down your spine, echoing wail of a train whistle. The problem is, there are no tracks nearby, at least none that are alive anymore. The earliest accounts came in the late 1800s, when the railroads were carving their way through Texas. Crews laying track near San Antonio swore they saw something they couldn't explain, a headlamp cutting through the dark, bearing down on them fast, the rails beneath them shaking as though something massive were closing in. The men braced for impact, hearts hammering in their chests. Right at the brink of disaster, the roaring train dissolved into darkness, leaving the men gasping at empty tracks. One man later said the sound of the whistle didn't fade away naturally. It was as if someone had yanked the noise right out of the air, leaving behind an emptiness that made the night feel colder. As years passed, the stories multiplied. Farmers in small towns spoke of being shaken awake in the dead of night by the rumble of an approaching engine. Their windows rattled, dishes shook, and the ground itself trembled. They rushed outside, expecting to see steel wheels grinding across the rails. But the tracks lay empty under the pale moonlight. Some claimed they saw the full body of the steam engine, black smoke rolling into the sky, its metal wheels spinning faster than anything human-made should. But within seconds, the image flickered like a dying flame, and the train was gone, leaving the farmers standing alone in silence so thick it pressed against their chests. The vanishing train of Texas was never bound to one place. Sightings spread across the state, from desert flats to cattle towns to forgotten stretches of track. Every description lined up too closely to be coincidence. The blinding headlamp, the churning wheels, the deafening whistle that rang in people's ears long after it stopped. It was solid, real, until it wasn't. One of the most chilling encounters happened near Fort Worth in the early 1900s. A group of passengers stood waiting on a platform long past midnight, shivering against the cool night breeze. When the rails began to hum, they looked down the line and saw the glow of a train's headlamp piercing the dark. The locomotive came roaring in, sparks flying as it screeched to a halt. Its doors swung open with a metallic groan. But inside, there were no lamps, no seats, no voices, only a hollow blackness that seemed to stretch forever. Some of the passengers stepped forward, believing it was their ride. Just as the first hand reached for the railing, the train shimmered, as though the air itself was pulling it apart, and vanished before their eyes. The witnesses described the moment like a curtain being pulled shut on reality itself. None of them forgot the emptiness that followed. Locals began to whisper that the train was cursed, tied to the countless tragedies that stained Texas rail history. Accidents were common head-on collisions, boiler explosions, fiery derailments. Lives ended violently, with steel and fire crushing men and women who thought the rails would carry them safely home. Some believed the ghost train carried their souls, doomed to ride endlessly, forever replaying the final moments of their journey. Others said it wasn't a memory at all, but a warning and omen that something terrible was about to happen. The whispers gained strength when railway workers started noticing a pattern. More than once, the vanishing train appeared days before a real disaster occurred on the same stretch of line. A phantom whistle one night, a derailment the next. Even hardened engineers, men who scoffed at superstition, began to keep quiet whenever the subject came up. The companies called the stories nonsense, but the men who spent their lives riding the rails knew better. They said the phantom train was a sign that death itself was making its rounds, and yet, the legend never died. Even now, in the quiet towns where tracks lie rusting in the grass, people claim to hear it. Sometimes it's faint, the soft clatter of wheels, a distant whistle floating through the night. Other times, it's unmistakable. The roar of an engine charging toward you, bright lights flooding the darkness. Only when you turn your head, the rails are empty, the sound gone. And you are left alone with the knowledge that something unnatural just passed by. By the time part 1 ends, the story had become more than folklore. It was a warning. And for those unlucky enough to see it up close, the vanishing train of Texas was no harmless tale. It was a promise that the night wasn't finished with them yet. The story of the vanishing train doesn't just belong to the past, still prowls the Texas plains, haunting people who never asked to become part of its legend. One such account comes from 1972 on a stretch of abandoned track outside Amarillo. A young couple parked near the rails late at night, windows down, enjoying the cool desert wind. Just as they were about to leave, the ground beneath the car began to vibrate. At first they thought it was an earthquake. Then came the whistle, long, sharp, mournful. They both froze. The man swore he saw a beam of light growing brighter down the tracks, bearing toward them. The woman screamed for him to drive, but before he could turn the key, the blinding headlamp was upon them. The couple braced themselves for impact. Instead, the light passed through the car as if it didn't exist. The woman described the sensation as cold, slicing straight through her body, like being submerged in ice water, and then nothing. The tracks lay silent. They left that night shaken, and neither of them ever returned to that spot. But sometimes the vanishing train isn't just seen or heard, changes people. A retired conductor, speaking in hushed tones, confessed that he once boarded it. Late one night in 1951, after falling asleep in a station, he was jolted awake by the thunder of an engine outside. He staggered out to find a train waiting at the platform, its doors wide open. Against his better judgment, he stepped inside. He swore the train was packed with passengers, but their faces were blurred, pale and unmoving, like wax figures caught mid-breath. None of them spoke. None of them blinked. The air was thick with smoke and the faint stench of burning oil. Before he could turn back, the doors slammed shut, and the train lurched forward. The ride felt endless, the windows showing nothing but black void rushing past. When the train finally screeched to a stop, he stumbled out into the same station he'd left, only to find the world outside unchanged. Except for one thing. Hours had passed, yet the clock inside the station hadn't moved at all. The conductor never set foot on a train again. He said the vanishing train didn't just replay the past, it stole time, swallowed it whole, and spat you back out, unchanged, while everything inside you felt shattered. In modern times, reports have shifted. Instead of steam engines, some claim to see sleek silver cars, glowing windows filled with silhouettes. Technology may have advanced, but the phantom adapts. It's always real, always solid, till the moment it isn't. The most terrifying reports come not from those who see it, but from those who hear it too late. One oil worker near Midland told of driving home at 2 a.m. when a wall of sound consumed his truck. Wheels grinding, whistles screaming, his headlights drowned by a sudden surge of light. He slammed the brakes, waiting for impact. But when he opened his eyes, his truck sat motionless on the highway. The light was gone. The sound gone. Yet his windshield was fogged with what looked like breath. He swore he wasn't alone in that cab for those few seconds. No one has ever explained what the vanishing train is. A trick of the mind, a mirage conjured by exhaustion and heat, or something darker, an echo of death bound to the rails forever, pulling in new souls with each pass. Even now, in towns where the tracks are long buried, children grow up hearing their grandparents warn them. If you hear the whistle at night, don't look for it, don't follow it. Whatever you do, never step aboard, because those who do, don't always come back. And somewhere out there, under the endless Texas sky, the phantom still runs. Maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow, its whistle will cut through the dark. You might hear it in the distance, the rails trembling beneath your feet. And when you turn to look, a headlamp might already be rushing toward you, bright, blinding, inevitable. The vanishing train of Texas doesn't stop for anyone. It takes who it wants. And when it passes, the night never feels the same again. The night air in rural Georgia always carries a certain stillness, a quiet that makes even the smallest sound echo as if the world itself were holding its breath. But some nights, that silence is broken by a sound no one wants to hear. A long, mournful whistle, drifting through the dark like a cry from another world. It's a whistle the locals swear doesn't belong to any living train. They call it the Midnight Ghost Train of Georgia. The story begins in the late 1800s, when railroads carved steel veins across the southern countryside. One night, a passenger train roared across a narrow bridge outside Macon, its cars full of travelers heading home. At just past midnight, something went terribly wrong. The iron wheels screamed, the bridge groaned, and in an instant the train derailed, plunging into the black waters below. Survivors later described the night as if hell itself had opened the hiss of scalding steam, with snapping like bones, and the cries of the trapped vanishing beneath the rushing river. The wreck was cleared, the bridge repaired, and trains ran again, but the memory lingered like a scar. And soon, strange whispers spread through the community. Farmers returning late from the fields reported hearing a train charging down the tracks long after the schedules ended. The ground would tremble, the rails would hum, but no train ever came. Others swore they saw a glowing headlight cutting through the mist, blazing down the tracks only for it to vanish as though swallowed by the night. At first, people dismissed the tales as nerves or tricks of moonlight. But then came the sounds, screeching brakes, a thunderous crash, screams echoing where there should have been silence. When neighbors rushed out to investigate, there was nothing, just the empty tracks stretching into darkness. The legend deepened when passengers at rural stations began to speak of something even stranger. At midnight, a train would sometimes pull in gleaming, silent doors sliding open as if inviting them inside. Yet there was no conductor, no living soul on board. A few daring souls who stepped into its cars swore they found themselves surrounded by pale figures in clothing from another century, silent, unmoving, their hollow eyes fixed to the windows as if forever trapped in the moment of their last ride. Those who stumbled back claimed the air inside was freezing cold, the ride endless, the world outside nothing but shadow. Then, without warning, the train would vanish, leaving them standing alone on the empty platform. Even railway workers had their stories. One engineer in the 1930s claimed he saw a massive engine barreling toward him. Terrified of a collision, he reversed his locomotive, sweat pouring down his face. The other train bore down, light blinding until it flickered, wavered, and dissolved into nothing. He swore that if he'd held his ground, it would have crushed him all the same. Soon, the whistle itself became a harbinger. Families whispered that if you heard it at midnight, it meant tragedy was near. A death, an accident, some curse that would strike without warning. For the people of those towns, the sound was not just eerie, it was a promise. And yet, even now, the train refuses to vanish from memory. Paranormal investigators come with cameras, recording devices, equipment to capture proof. Some claim they've caught faint whistles, clanging wheels, or voices calling out from nowhere. Locals don't bother with proof. To them, the ghost train has always been real as the steel rails it still runs. But the legend is more than stories. 'Cause sometimes, when the night is still and the hour creeps past 12, the silence breaks. A whistle rises, low and aching, drifting across the valleys. And if you're unlucky enough to hear it, you'll know in your bones it's not just another train. It's the dead, still traveling, their journey never finished. And their path may be crossing yours. On a fog-heavy night in early spring, 3 college students from Atlanta drove to the abandoned stretch of tracks near the old bridge. They wanted proof of the midnight ghost train. Armed with cameras and a sense of invincibility, they laughed off the locals' warnings. At 11:55, they set up their equipment, the mist curling around their ankles like smoke. At first, nothing. Just the buzz of crickets and the creak of the forest. Midnight struck, and one of them checked his watch, grinning. No train, no whistle, just silence. Then the rails beneath their feet began to vibrate. Light shimmered in the distance, faint at first, then blinding. The students froze. A whistle split the air, long and mournful, rattling the trees. The sound pierced their chests, like a scream held just for them. The headlight bore down, growing closer, closer, until the entire night seemed swallowed by it. And then, impossibly, the engine appeared. Polished black steel, windows glowing. No engineer inside. The students stumbled back, shouting over the roar, but one curiosity stronger than fear stepped forward. Inside sat rows of passengers, their faces pale, their eyes fixed on nothing. He swore they turned toward him as one, their hollow gaze pinning him to the platform. His friends screamed for him to run. He didn't. When they reached out to grab him, the train lurched forward. In seconds, the light and sound were gone, leaving nothing but silence and mist. The rails were cold, empty. He was gone. The other 2 returned to town at dawn, pale and trembling, their cameras shattered, their story dismissed as hysteria. But locals shook their heads. They knew what had happened. The boy had taken his final ride, carried off by the midnight ghost train of Georgia. Some say you can still hear him, his voice blending with the cries of those long-dead passengers, whispering through the fog when the whistle blows. And if you stand on the tracks too long, if you linger when that mournful call drifts across the fields, the train might not just pass you by. It might stop for you. And when the doors slide open, you'll understand the truth. The midnight ghost train is not a story. It's an invitation. And once you step aboard, your journey never ends.